Yeah. I call the Assembly to order. We're dealing with an order of the day and we're dealing with planning, so I'm going to ask the clerk just to fill us in and where we are at the moment.
Thank you, moderator. Right. I've got to get the right glasses on. Here we go.
I'll keep offering you my glasses, clerk.
I know. Anyway, so thank you very much, moderator. We've moved to the order of the day and we are going to be taking sections 15 and 16 along with the 2 overtures and a new 17. So, so we start with section 15 of the Deliverance of Faith Action Programme Leadership Team. And you will see new faces at the table because we have Karen Campbell and Alan Hamilton, who have been the convener and vice convener of Presbytery Mission Plan Implementation Group. God, did I get that right? Oh, I'm quite pleased with myself there. And I think that's it, moderator. Is that enough?
I'm just speaking of straight into
it. So section 15, we're straight into that.
Straight into section...
Oh, no, there is an amendment. There's an amendment. My apologies, I haven't sat down.
Into section 15, but there's an amendment to it in the name of Reverend Margaret MacArthur. Yep, while we get ready, you read out the amendment.
Thank you very much, moderator. So this is the amendment to section 15 in the name of Margaret MacArthur. At the end of section 15 to add recognising that some of a presbytery's overall allocation of posts may be divided into part-time roles.
Okay, please speak.
Thank you, moderator. Margaret MacArthur, 147. Moderator, I thank the Faith Action Programme leadership team. I can never say their abbreviation very well, so I'll give them their full title, for their hard work in preparing this report. It's been an excellent labour of love. I also rejoice in having heard from those approaching their very first ministries and those in the first 5 years of ministry. There is hope, I believe, for the Church of Scotland. I, however, am on the last straight, heading towards retirement in a few years, having been ordained for nearly 30 years. And yesterday, my friend, colleague, and parish neighbour, the Reverend Christine Murdoch, spoke about the importance of the call to ministry, as did the convener today in his opening remarks, as yourself also, moderator, in our times of worship. 9 years ago, I heard and responded to the call to become the minister of Cardross Parish Church, and it has been my joy and privilege to serve the congregation and community in that capacity ever since, supported greatly by a wonderful team of busy, dedicated and hard-working people. Throughout my life and my ministry, I've always stood on the promise of Jesus that when we seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, then all other things will be added unto us. So with no real thought to stipend or future pension provision, I offered myself as a servant of the church as a 70% minister. But as every minister knows only too well, whether full or part-time, it is an impossible task to work within our allocated hours. We are called to a vocation, not a job. Moderator, I offer this amendment to section 15 of the Deliverance for consideration by the General Assembly, simply for the purposes of clarification, that we may take cognizance of the fact that there are others like myself whose ministries, together with those in full-time ministry, will, in the words of section 10.6.3 of the report, form the shape of the Church's ministry over the next 5 years. Thank you, moderator, and I have a seconder, Maureen Walker, 162, if required.
Right, thank you. Is it seconded? Thank you very much. Any questions? I have no indications on the screen. Anything online, Sheila? Questions or comments online? No. All right, in that instance then, I'll ask the convener.
Moderator McNeil 454. Our thanks to Margaret for suggesting this amendment. We're happy to receive it, given that when a presbytery are allocated, whatever allocation they get, it's up to them to actually decide how that is best used across their presbytery.
Thank you. We've heard that the convener is prepared to accept it. Is the Assembly prepared to accept the amendment? Then we deal with, thank you, we deal with the amended section 15. Questions or comments on the amended section 15? If there are none, then does the Assembly accept the amended 15? And online. Right, I've noticed of a new section. Oh, sorry, Overture of Glasgow, Presbytery. Oh. You get called to the bar. I'm making no comment because I'll get into trouble. But please identify yourself and then present your overture.
Okay. Moderator Ruth Morrison, Minister of St Mary's Parish Church in Kirkintilloch, presenting the overture before us now on behalf of Glasgow Presbytery. I wasn't sure how to begin today, and then a song popped into my head. Not one from the new Supplementary hymnary, because I've just picked it up, but this one here. I can see clearly now that the rain is gone. I can see all obstacles in my way. Gone are the dark clouds that had me blind. It's going to be a bright, bright, sunshiny day. Now, I don't know why that song crept into my thoughts. Maybe it was the anticipation of coming here today. Or maybe it had more to do with my thinking about mission planning and this overture. For what we seek to do here in this overture as Glasgow Presbytery is to ask for some clarity. We want to see clearly. We're concerned about the consequence of what might happen if a particular course of action is taken, because ultimately, like everyone else, we are working hard in a very tight timescale to implement the mission plan and look towards brighter days. So why this overture? Well, in October 2023, Glasgow Presbytery were informed that a communication had been received from the convener of PIMPIG to inform us that the allocation of ministries as part of the mission planning process would be effective from the 31st of December 2025. This immediately raised concerns. We thought we were working towards a 5-year plan. We thought we had until December 27. Still quite a challenge to get that worked out. Indeed, whilst all reviewable tenures will be terminated in our plan by 25, some of the adjustments within the approved mission plan for Glasgow aren't due to take place until 26 and 27. It became clear that this directive was a result of the Assembly Trustees' report in 21 that indicated that by the 31st of December 25, the Church would only be able to afford 600 ministry posts plus 60 vacancies, and accordingly, ministry allocation to Presbytery was worked out. However, the Presbytery Mission Plan Act itself is unclear regarding the point in time at which the number of ministry posts is to be met. And no decision of the General Assembly since 21, or even on 21, has required adherence to the allocated figures prior to the conclusion of a 5-year period. As such, the Act does not seem to prohibit Presbytery granting permission to call to charges which conform to the approved mission plan. However, there seems to be some uncertainty and some confusion, and so we seek clarity today. Whilst this is currently only an issue faced by Glasgow, it does have the potential to affect other presbyteries too. So I want to say from the outset that we're not looking for preferential treatment. We're simply asking that congregations, whatever presbytery they belong to, who have gone through the unsettling, often painful process of change and adjustment to fulfill the approved mission plan, be allowed to call, to see some light and to hope for brighter days, even if for a temporary period the ministry allocation for a presbytery is exceeded. We all understand the challenges facing our church, not least financially, and we know that we need to get on with it. I stand here as a minister in unrestricted tenure who left my previous charge in part because I knew that the linkage of which I was a minister to was not tenable in the new mission plan. I felt God calling me away, found myself in a different presbytery, now working towards a union with another congregation, and in the cluster that I'm part of, have seen the departure of 2 ministers since my arrival in 2021, and another leaving in just a couple of weeks. Ministers are trying our best to be flexible, to be open to God's call, to see the obstacles and do our best to get out of the way, if that's what needs to happen to allow mission plans to be worked out. However, the consequences of not allowing charges who have gone through the hard work of adjustment to call simply because for a time the ministry allocation will exceed that which has been given, well, that seems unfair, and it has a very real potential to demotivate and demoralise, thwart willingness perhaps to enter into adjustments, and ultimately frustrate God's call, potentially restricting the movement of ministers within and between presbyteries, prejudicing probationers and ministers in familiarisation who have not secured a call, and prolonging vacancies, meaning extra burden on interim moderators who are often ministers, impacting mission in their parishes. In Glasgow, this will be an issue right across the presbytery, from the richest to the poorest and all in between. And just to give you an example, to show what this looks like in reality, let's take the East End of Glasgow, where the combined congregations of St Andrew's East, St Paul's, St Enoch's Hogganfield, Garthumlock and Craigend, Steps and Rocasey, which have a combined population of 39,000 and are presently vacant, though allocated to ministries in the mission plan, if there is a cap on inducting to be enforced, this whole area, which includes 3 priority areas, and where there is currently no inducted minister, would remain unserved. It is right that we hear again at this assembly about the emerging sense of crisis, the drive being all about the mission imperative and the need to pick up the pace of change. That's why we need congregations who have been deemed vital to the mission of the church, part of an approved presbytery mission plan, to be allowed to call, not to wait, not to hold on, to hang on in there until we reach a certain number. That would be careless, deeply damaging, and stymie mission across the whole. In a time, moderator, when we are encouraged to build together, let's not leave those who are ready to get on facing a brick wall. And so I present the overture and humbly ask that it be determined that all vacant charges which conform to the final position of the approved mission plan and which in all other respects qualify for permission to call shall not have permission withheld by the Faith Action Programme Leadership Team, working through the Presbytery Mission Plan Implementation Group, for the reason that only the number of ministry posts allocated to the presbytery by the General Assembly has at that time been exceeded. Moderator, I am not a commissioner, and so I present the deliverance, and I trust that the Principal Clerk will do the necessary and keep me right.
I move the deliverance.
Seconded. Thank you. I call now for questions. I've got some questions on the screen, and one question, one comment. And it is useful if you can intimate in advance you wish to ask a question. But Scott Burton, first of all.
Scott Burton, number 221, question for the proposer. I I'm just wondering what happens in the possibility that people don't move for quite a period of time, and the effect that that then has on everybody else and whatnot. Like, how do we navigate that? How are you proposing that the Faith Action Leadership Team help navigate that? What's been your thinking around that kind of dynamic? Because I know, and I've heard stories of people not engaging in adjustment. And so that's the big risk, isn't it, with your proposal?
Thank you, Scott, for the question. Ultimately, I suppose today we're dealing with vacancies, but I suppose the hope would be that by the end of December 27, that there would be flexibility, that God's call would be very much at work, and ministers would either be moving on to other callings and congregations, perhaps in other presbyteries. Ministers may well be retiring, and that folks will move. I think what we're dealing with here is the hope of some clarity and for a period of time for some flexibility to allow that to happen.
Right, thank you. I have no other indications of questions. So if that's the case, I'll then call in Fiona Crawford, who's got a comment registered.
Moderator, sorry, I put into the hub earlier on that I had a question, but it was under point 2. But is my name there?
Right, we're still, we'll come to that in a bit. Right, sorry.
Thank you, Moderator. Fiona Crawford, 186. I wish to make a comment in favour of this overture. According to the FAPOLT table, Appendix 7, there are 40 assistant ministers, 46 ministers in reviewable charges, and 23 familiarisation and probationers. That's over 100 people, not including those who feel called to move to another charge or are considering that. Meantime, many congregations are working really hard and making the painful steps towards adjustment in the hope, in part, that they'll be able to call. Alongside that, it is the legal right of ministers in unrestricted charges not to adjust at this time, and that's between them and God. So we have a significant number of ministers already actively seeking or in the pipeline to be people who will be actively looking for a charge. Congregations actively working towards making a change and conforming to the agreed plan. But because of a temporary over-allocation, in part because of a number of ministers who are within clusters in unrestricted charges, these congregations might not be granted a right to call. Moderator, surely it is in the interests of all concerned, for congregations and for ministers alike, who are both actively seeking and actively working towards conforming to the plan, that these congregations should get a right to call and allow the ministers waiting in the pipeline, desperate to be able to fill a charge. Not all, I would agree, would necessarily want to come to Glasgow, though why not? But this, as Ruth has said, this could affect more than just Glasgow Presbytery in the future. Meantime, Glasgow Presbytery, I'm confident, are continuing to work incredibly hard in trying to make the plan fit the allocation. Thank you.
Thank you. Just, I think it would be helpful to the Assembly if speakers are from the Presbytery where an overture has come from. You just indicate it. You can indicate it to us, but you actually said enough that we know that you're from the Presbytery of Glasgow. Now, I've got other questions come up. This is in section 1, so we'll deal with questions first. So it's Sean Swindell's first. Sorry, yes?
Following your last comment, I will withdraw my question. Apologies.
Oh, you're perfectly entitled to make a question. Just, it is useful for the Assembly to know if you're from the Presbytery where the overture has come from.
Yeah. Moderator, just a general comment.
Name and number, please. This is questions at the moment.
It is, yes. A general question.
And your name and number.
Beg your pardon, Martin. Sean Swindell's 374.
Right, thank you.
My question concerns about employment rights. I get it that the church is going through a time of crisis and great change, but there's a need to balance the need for change also with the position of existing ministers. And it's just to be aware of, you might call it the unintended law of consequences, sorry, the law of unintended consequences, that there are issues of civil and employment law here. And it might just be useful if we could just get some clarification about the kind of restrictions that the church is under. Thank you.
Convener, would you like to answer the particular question?
Moderator McNeil 454, my understanding is that this is a matter of civil law because as ministers we're not actually employees. Is that correct? So employment legislation doesn't apply to us in the same way. Hope that's helpful.
Okay. No more questions. So, sorry, Convener. No more questions, so I'm going to actually then move to receiving report, and then we can deal with the comments that are on the screen. So it's the first section, receive the overture. And online. Now I'll call in for the comments that have been registered, Kenneth Gray and then Stuart Gowdy. Oh, I'm the gallery. That's you.
Thank you, Moderator. Kenneth Gray, 143. The comment I want to make is that all of the presbyteries were in the same position, and we felt that as we produced the plans, we may well get to the point where we had an agreed plan, but we had more people in post than the plan allowed for. I think, fortunately, we've come under that bar. But I think any presbytery could be in that situation, not necessarily of their own guilt, if you like, of their own fault. And the 5-year plan is supposed to give a certain amount of flexibility. And I think what the people in Glasgow are asking for is a certain amount of that flexibility and perhaps a certain amount of that sympathy, because their problems, I think, in producing this plan have probably been bigger than anyone else's. And I would just make the comment that as a neighbouring presbytery, we would have quite a lot of sympathy for what they are asking for.
Thank you. And Stuart Gowdy.
Moderator, Stuart Gowdy, 408, former clerk to Lochaber Presbytery. In September, August 2022, Lochaber Presbytery's plan was approved for 5.5 ministers. At that point, we had 5 ministers with a vacancy in Fort William Kilmallie, which would take us over the threshold. And we inquired of Pimpig whether that would prevent us from granting permission to call to the presbytery, which would take us to 6, whereas our allocation was only 5.5. But we were assured we would be able to grant permission to call, which we then processed through and appointed the minister into Fort William Kilmallie in December 2015, 2 weeks before we merged with all the other presbyteries into Clare, A&E. So there is a precedent that we were granted this previously, and I support the overture in clarifying the position that if there's a requirement to appoint, to grant permission to call to approved vacancies, even if that takes them temporarily over the threshold that's permitted. Thank you, Moderator.
Thank you. I've been asked to call Rory MacLeod, and then we'll hear from William Wilson.
MacLeod, Keith Hearn Shach, MacLeod 417, Chudin Luach Ev Anush MacVahin, a son of Kuch Gaelic, Kumost Anush. I'd like to speak in favour of the overture. So I'm a Presbytery clerk myself, Claire Ellen E, and I appreciate that the cap has been introduced to help presbyteries like my own that are unlikely to bump up against our ceiling. However, like my colleague Stuart Gowdy in the legacy Presbytery Lochcarron Skye, of which I was clerk, we came pretty close, but Pimpig helpfully allowed us to proceed with a deferred union in order to maintain momentum in our planning process. So we would prefer to see any presbytery, be it Glasgow or anywhere else, able to maintain their momentum as opposed to being unnecessarily held back purely on an administrative or numerative principle. So I'd heartily endorse this overture. Moran taing of order after.
Thank you. So William Wilson and then Alex Shuttleworth.
William Wilson, 183, member of Glasgow Presbytery. Moderator, I would like to give a worked example of how this affects congregations on the ground in Glasgow. On Sunday past, I chaired a meeting at the congregation where I'm interim moderator. They have already once voted against the basis of union, which they're required to assent to under the new presbytery plan. And so we held an informal meeting of the congregation to try to address their concerns, to explain better the basis of union, and to explain the intention of the presbytery plan. All sorts of questions and comments were made which reflected the pain that the congregation has gone through in losing buildings, etc., and the anticipated pain that they will go through with the basis of union that we are recommending. One of the questions that I was asked was, if we vote in favour of this basis of union, will we then get to call a minister? And I had to honestly say, I don't know. A few months ago, I could have said yes, because that was our understanding. And I had to say, I don't know. And the comment was made from the floor, why do the goalposts keep moving? And I had to shrug my shoulders and say, I really don't know, but I hope we'll address it this week in this overture. For the sake of congregations such as the one I was with on Sunday and others throughout Glasgow, I would urge the Assembly to accept this overture. Thank you.
Thank you. Alex Shuttleworth.
Alex Shuttleworth, number 279. I have enormous sympathy with the overture as it has come from Glasgow. But I see, in terms of the first question, which was asked about what happens with what we used to call stick-it ministers, because we haven't actually addressed the problem of tenure properly, I think, over the years at this General Assembly. What will happen if you suddenly get 8 or 9 ministers who say, well, we're simply not going to play ball? But I wonder, and I suppose this comment really comes in the form of a question both to the Pimpig team and also to the proposer of the overture. If there were 2 variables introduced into this overture, namely a percentage over which you could not go. So an example, I think, of Glasgow has something like 80 odd ministers, is that correct? In its plan. So if you said a percentage of roughly 5%, that's 4 ministers. And also a limit of time for which that state can exist. Would that not give you both some relief as the plaintiff, if you like, presenting the overture, and some reassurance as those allocating the central resources, that we wouldn't have the situation which was envisaged in the first question which was asked, that this would simply run out of control because ministers were sticking and not moving in favour of adjustment. So that may require some clerky finagling at the top table to make that happen, but I think that might be a suggestion which would help us to unblock the situation to everyone's satisfaction, Moderator.
Thank you. I've got intimation of a question from Stuart. Sorry. A question in the name of Stuart Crawford.
Stuart Crawford, 166. Thank you, Moderator. And it is as a Minister of Glasgow Presbytery I bring this question. It was indeed as a member of Glasgow Presbytery I recently attended the evening session of the roadshows, the joint roadshows that Fappelt and Seeds of Growth are taking around the country that Tommy's alluded to earlier today and yesterday. During the sessions, churches were asked to air their hopes, their fears on post-it notes all around the room. So it's in that context that I bring this question to the convener of Fappelt this afternoon. Is it just that vacant congregations who have worked tirelessly for now over 2 years with one or more of their neighbouring congregations towards some form of adjustment as part of the agreed Presbytery Mission Action Plan, and who after conversations have agreed the disposal or retention of any buildings for centres of worship within that adjustment, are now at the point where they have the right to call a minister into the adjusted new parish that will lead them forward as a faith community, discern God's will and work in that area, only to find out now that they may not be able to call that minister because we are temporarily over our presbytery allocation for posts. So my question is that just? Thank you.
Convener? I think it's a question. I think the answer at the minute is you'll deal with it in the response. So I think the convener has to say so to the Assembly.
Thank you, Moderator McNeill 454. So, yeah, I'm very happy to invite to answer these various questions Reverend Dr. Karen Campbell, convener of Pimbeek Presbytery Mission Plan Implementation Group, to come and address the Assembly and answer some of these questions, if the Moderator is in agreement with that.
That's fine, thank you. Comment from John Pickles. I should say John Pickley after yesterday. Sorry.
Thank you. John Pickles, 105. It's more of a question. I'm very confused by this. There's been a number of times that it's been mentioned that that this would benefit the Presbytery of Glasgow and other presbyteries. I wonder which other presbyteries, not that they need named, but are there other presbyteries that are affected by this other than Presbytery of Glasgow? And the comment that follows that, I suppose, is how... I'm assuming this is a kind of kindness of the General Assembly to the Presbytery of Glasgow as it is trying to work out its position when many other presbyteries have already consolidated their presbytery mission plan, presumably because of the size. But that's my statement. Thank you.
Right, thank you. Sorry, was that a question? Was that a question to the convener or to the mover of the overture?
The convener would have the information.
Do you want to repeat the question? I think there's a little bit of confusion, certainly in my mind.
Certainly. To which other presbyteries would this overture apply?
At the current moment, every single... Oh, sorry. My name is Karen Campbell. I'm a parish minister and the convener of Pimbeek. At the current moment, every single presbytery in Scotland is well below its numbers, except Glasgow and Lewis, which has dissented to go into a bigger presbytery and has not yet agreed a presbytery plan.
Thank you. Comment now in the name of Brian Kerr.
Moderator Kerr, 227. I'm perhaps reading this slightly differently, which is not unusual. This says it refers to charges in the final form in terms of adjustment within the plan. So this is not about ministers being stuck somewhere because they haven't agreed to go into adjustment. This is about once adjustment has taken place in its final form, the only reason that they can't then get to call a minister is because of the cap. So this is about achieving the plan. It's not about a step on the way. So it's not about ministers being stuck in places. It's not about ministers saying they're not going to move on, or even congregations saying they're not going to enter into adjustment at this stage, or even voting against. This is what happens once all those things have been done, once congregations have decided that that is the route they're going to take, but simply because of maths, that they can't get permission to call a minister. And I think for that reason, I support this overture, and I hope that the General Assembly might as well.
Two more comments have appeared on screen. Abigail Morrison, followed by Michael Goss. Okay.
Abigail Morrison, number 79, just to speak in favour of the motion and to say much the same as we've just heard. It really is a case of practical maths. If you consider a theoretical presbytery, which has 2 posts in it in the plan, and you have 2 ministers in post, and you have 1 minister in post in charge A, 1 in charge B, and you have a vacancy in charge C, and charge A is going to disappear, the minister in charge A, if you cap the number, cannot apply. You can't advertise a vacancy in C, and the minister can't move. So if you cap it like this, then you cannot get ministers in the wrong charges, for want of a better word, to move to the right charges in the plan. So I support the motion.
Thank you. And Michael Goss. Not yet.
Thank you, Moderator. Mike Goss, number 312. I'm opposed to this because I'm just trying to work out which presbyteries would like to assist some of their vacancies so that the number of posts don't end up costing the church more than we can actually pay for. Because we're going to have to take those posts from somewhere to give them to Glasgow. That's the reality. We have a limited supply of ministers and a limited amount of money to pay them. So where are we going to take them from?
A question has come in from Neil Glover.
Word 303. I'm just a bit confused. Maybe this will come in the summing up. What a principle brought Pinpig to this point? I don't think it can be financial, because if a minister moves from Glasgow to another presbytery, the overall stipendiary cost to the whole church is still the same. So was it fairness? Was it because there was a feeling that Glasgow could maybe have done more? Was it an interpretation of church law? I'm just wondering which principle led to that point.
Okay. Is that a question of the mover of the overture?
No, sorry, a question of Pinpig. I'm asking a question. What principle led Pinpig to make this decision?
Okay. They're asking what decision? Neil.
My understanding is that Glasgow were told that they couldn't call extra ministers because they had above allocation according to the numbers that were allocated in the plan, and I'm interested to know from Pinpig what principle led them to decide to communicate that to Glasgow Presbytery.
Moderator McNeil 454, I'd like to invite Convenor of Pinpig, Reverend Dr. Karen Campbell, to speak and address these questions. Thank you.
Karen Campbell, the Convenor of Pinpig. We didn't come to a conclusion. We don't believe there is an issue, because in 2023, FAPOLT and the Assembly trustees agreed a protocol that where a presbytery has planned for a reduction in ministry but is unable to achieve this, despite the best efforts and willingness of a congregation to comply with the presbytery mission plan, The presbytery will be permitted to exceed its allocation for a period given good missional reasons. This has been consistently communicated to every presbytery, including Glasgow. The East End of Glasgow doesn't need to be concerned if the presbytery does its job and invites us to ask the Assembly trustees to increase its number for the post it needs.
I've got a question now. Assembly, the question was asked, the question was answered. You know, whether you're happy or not happy, we can deal with that when it comes to voting. But Paul Middleton has got a question to ask.
461 Middleton. I always say to my students, if you're sitting confused, other people probably are as well. And I'm just a simple professor, but I'm quite confused. So I'm, in light of that last answer, which may answer the question, could I ask the mover of the overture, is it the case, and I hope this question comes out as coherent and not cause further confusion, is it the case that the numbers will be exceeded, however there is concrete plans through reviewable tenure and so on, but so that at the end of the period, the numbers will be as they should be according to the plan? Or is it the case that there are still some folk who may be in, what's the permanent one called? Unrestricted, sorry. I hope that doesn't affect my registration of ministries. Or is it the case that folk in unrestricted, there are still folk in unrestricted parishes which will prevent the plan from being accomplished at the appropriate time? So I hope that's clear. So which of it? Because I think that makes a huge difference. Thank you.
Moderator Grant Barclay, 163. I am the clerk to the Presbytery of Glasgow, and therefore I wish I was at the bar, and think in fact I might be. Just to explain, the answer to Professor Middleton's question is yes and yes, by which I mean the only calls which Glasgow is seeking in respect of all of this are to approved mission plan charges. If everything worked out perfectly, then at the conclusion of the plan, Glasgow would be down at its figures. However, the answer to the second question is also yes, because we cannot guarantee that at the end of the plan, Glasgow will be down to its figure, and the key mischief in relation to that are those ministers, I do have to say, a very small number of ministers indeed, who are insisting upon their right of tenure and are also insisting on not changing that tenure to conform to the mission plan, unlike Dr. Morrison, who has already explained that she's doing that. While I'm speaking, might I also say, moderator, this is not a beef with the mission plan implementation group. We are doing our level best to work well, and what we recognise is a really difficult area. So the overture is designed and articulated in terms of clarity. In raw numbers, our allocation is 84. Our current engagement of staff, we think, is about 91.5. We think we're going to get down to 86 probably by the end of 2025. But at that point, Abigail's point is still well made, because that's above 84. We genuinely think that the wriggle room that Glasgow requires in order to make all of this work is in the order of something between 5 and 8 posts. The idea that this is a runaway train clearly is not true, because for it to be a runaway train, we would need to be appointing ministers on unrestricted tenure with no thought for tomorrow. And that's something we simply cannot do. So if it helps the Assembly to be aware that these are the raw figures, that's the issue which we are facing. We are doing our level best. We have had huge support from PIMPIG. And I do want to say that in another complicated situation which is not part of the overture. PIMPIG have been hugely helpful in allowing us some flexibility, so this is not about some carping criticism of the committee, but it is about receiving the clarity which Glasgow, I admit, uniquely requires in order to be permitted sufficient wriggle room to enable us, I would hope, by the end of the 5-year period or very shortly after that, to have 84 and no more than 84 persons engaged under the approved mission plan. I do hope that that's helpful clarification.
Thank you. We have a question from John Pickles.
Moderator 105, John Pickles. Just wanted to pick up on Mike Goss's point and also what the conveners just said. When we were looking at mission planning numbers across Scotland, and I remember this distinctly because we had a +1 in our Presbytery of Annandale and Ester, which was Carlisle, we were told at that point categorically that there was no wiggle room for any other ministries across Scotland, and that the setup that we had was set. Now, that was a couple of years ago, so things may well have changed. But my question is, if there is now to be wiggle room, and the wiggle room that Grant Barclay is and colleagues are expressing, where are those ministries coming from? Thank you.
And the question is directed to
The convener of PIMPIG, primarily.
Of PIM. Wriggle room.
I'm getting as tired of this as you are, I'm sure. Moderator McNeil 454, I'd like to invite the Reverend Dr. Karen Campbell, convener of PIMPIG, to address Assembly.
Karen Campbell, convener of PIMPIG. The wiggle room talked about was before the protocol was agreed. The protocol is not about wiggle room. The protocol is about justice, about allowing a presbytery to implement its plan. When we agreed the plans, when we all went through that really difficult process, it was a vision document. It's a vision document of what the presbytery thought would be the outlay of ministry in 5 years' time. The implementation of plans is a lot more nutty than that. It's been a lot more challenging. Plans have changed and grown and changed. So we have to have flexibility to allow those presbyteries with challenges to have an extra post if they require it. So we have taken the protocol and we have invited the Assembly trustees to grant Glasgow Presbytery permission for an extra post. We said for all the right reasons, including justice and right order, that the Assembly trustees would be invited to agree an extra post. And they have agreed an extra post, and it has been communicated to Glasgow. So this is not a theoretical thing. It's not wiggle room. It's about justice. And so far, because of the specific challenges of Glasgow, that one extra post so far has already been granted to Glasgow.
I'm conscious that there are 2 more people wishing to make comment. Is it the will of the Assembly that we should hear these 2 people briefly and then listen to the mover closing before the convener closes? It's okay? No? Do you wish to hear the 2? No, you've had enough. Okay. There's nothing on the screen. Nothing at all. If you can be really brief.
David Cameron, 90. Feels like my age. Moderator, thank you for this brief opportunity to speak and affirm Dr. Campbell's just last... Sorry. I should have been listening earlier on about instructions. Just to affirm Dr. Campbell and what she said there, the protocol came around because the PIMPIG knew
over a year ago that during implementation of plans, something like this would probably be needed. So if you bear with me just a wee moment, they would only approve a draft presbytery mission plan which conforms to the number of ministries allocated to that presbytery by the General Assembly. Nevertheless, the Assembly trustees recognise that congregations which are otherwise willing to implement the mission plan may be unfairly prejudiced by circumstances out with their control. For example, when two congregations are to unite, one in vacancy, the other with an incumbent minister, the first being willing to do so under that minister, but that minister being unwilling to become minister of the new united charge, or where unwillingness to implement a mission plan elsewhere prevents a presbytery granting permission to call to a congregation in vacancy which does not require adjustment or is otherwise willing to be adjusted in accordance with the mission plan. And these things happen. Within the figure set by the Assembly trustees, FAPLT has discretion about how to allocate additional ministries across the church, and this is the protocol. It will have regard to the needs of the church as a whole and to equitable distribution across the church. We'll need to be satisfied that the presbytery and its congregations are genuinely working towards implementation of the approved mission plan. In the absence of compelling justification, it is unlikely that FAPLT would allocate an additional ministry to a presbytery to allow a congregation in vacancy which had voted against union under the incumbent minister or the other charged to call a minister. Any application must be supported by a compelling mission narrative, and any form of adjustment will be for a maximum period as set by FAPLT. This was a pragmatic step to get to the position where we could accommodate Glasgow, as we have just done in the last 2 weeks. It's not a free-for-all for additional ministries when other presbyteries have got to the end of their plan and now implementing that process. I hope that gives a wee bit more clarity and helps the convener. And I hope saying that we really don't need this overture because that protocol exists. Thank you, Moderator.
Is it the will of the Assembly that we hear the two voices who have been waiting in the wings? Go for it.
It might not be, forgive me. My name's Teesdale. I'm the Darts Commissioner, number 180. I want to be quick and to the point and just say something to the Assembly and to everyone here. And I hope you'll forgive me, Moderator, but you can beat me up afterwards. We in the Church of Scotland need to improve in our communication style, how we communicate decisions nationally, at presbytery level and locally. I should say I'm a member of the Presbytery of Glasgow. I've sat in Dr. Campbell's seat for a year as convener of what was then known as the Presbytery Planning Task Group. And during my year as planning convener, I stressed to Presbytery that communication was key. Please, to every committee, every presbytery, every Kirk session, every commissioner, everyone who's listening, from the Principal Clerk's Office to the Comms Department, can we please commit to improve our communication? Apologies, Moderator, but I think it's important to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we move now and ask the mover to respond? Briefly.
Yeah, no problem. Moderator, thank you for all the comments that we've had this afternoon. I would urge the Assembly to vote in favour of this overture because it's seeking some clarity. Glasgow Presbytery are not looking for preferential treatment and more ministers. We're asking for the flexibility to allow those folks, those congregations who have gone through the hard work of being adjusted and being part of an approved mission plan to call a minister. The flexibility within this 5-year plan to make that so. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I ask the convener to close the double act?
Moderator McNeil 454, I'd like to invite Dr. Campbell to respond.
You do it so well. Thank you. Karen Campbell, Pimpig convener. I don't need to tell anybody here how difficult presbytery planning is. We're all people in parishes. We know how hard it is. But saying that, this overture is unnecessary. There is no lack of clarity in the presbytery mission planning process. The risk of injustice, which the presbytery claim to have identified, doesn't exist. Glasgow claims there is a problem. They say presbyteries can't grant permission to call. If to do so would take it over its allocation of ministries. And blanket permission for any presbytery to allow a call to any vacant changes which is envisaged within its plan. In all likelihood and for the foreseeable future, this will not be a challenge for any presbytery other than Glasgow and Lewis. All but these two presbyteries will, in all likelihood, be able to permit all vacant congregations to call without exceeding their numbers. I'm not going to repeat what I've already said. The Presbytery of Glasgow is currently 7 ministers in post over its allocation, 84 plus the one the ATs have agreed. And Glasgow made a decision, and rightly so, that 6.5 of its posts would either be for the office or pan-presbytery posts and not specifically to parishes. And you can see a small connection. Nevertheless, it is by no means certain that the presbytery will need to remove ministers whose charges are reviewable or be prevented from granting permission to call to other ministers. I've already talked about the protocol, and I'm not going to mention that again. I live with hyperextensionism, moderator, and I can assure you I am very flexible. That's an image Dr. Hamilton will never get out of his head. And I can assure you that PIMPIG is both sympathetic and empathetic. We are all experiencing the same things as everybody else. So in presenting this overture, the Presbytery of Glasgow has manufactured a problem which doesn't exist. Similarly, the Presbytery has said that there is a lack of clarity. It doesn't exist. The General Assembly is the Supreme Court of the Church. What the General Assembly decides, the Church, including the Presbytery of Glasgow, is bound to do. The General Assembly of 21 said, note under the Assembly Trustees' Deliverance 9, note the work done in projecting both future availability and affordability of ministries across the Church of Scotland, and set as a realistic aim that presbyteries should seek to implement by 25 presbytery plans based on 600 full-time equivalent ministries and a target of no more than 60 further vacant charges at any one time. This was affirmed by the General Assemblies of 21 and 23, and I think you also affirmed it yesterday. And from the outset, everyone involved in the presbytery planning process, including the Presbytery of Glasgow, understood that each presbytery was required to have a presbytery plan in place for the planned numbers, insofar as that plan could be implemented by 2025, all well and good. If not, the presbytery was expected to seek to implement its plan as and when it was able to do so. However, should commissioners decide that there are problems to be solved, let's look briefly at the solution which Glasgow proposes. It appears that the Presbytery of Glasgow believes that its overture is in its interests. I don't think it's in the interest of any other presbytery. The blanket permission to exceed its allocation, which Glasgow proposes, benefits only Glasgow. It jeopardises the careful allocation of ministries across the rest of the church, and effectively allows Glasgow to benefit disproportionately. In particular, there are only limited numbers of ministers of word and sacrament available, fewer than are needed even under limitations of current allocations. So we have the protocol. We can ask the Assembly trustees for an extra post if it's required. And it's not just for Glasgow. So this protocol makes the overture null and void. So to grant Glasgow what it wants risks to skew recruitment in favour of Glasgow while avoiding the controls which currently exist and are designed to benefit the whole church. In short, moderator, Glasgow wants special dispensation.
I answer that call of being a short moderator. I think we should, however, move now to an electronic vote. Oh, you're finishing, right? I thought you were speaking on behalf of.
No, just to bring us to a place of, in terms of responding to the motion.
You gave.
So what Tommy was going to say is, moderator, encourage the... Oh, well.
You don't need to move it. It's already before the assembly, so you're okay. So shall we move now to an electronic vote? Sheila.
Thank you, moderator. Sheila Kirk, 532. I've been lurking behind this computer screen all day in anticipation of this moment. We are now going to have an electronic vote, either for or against the overture from the Presbytery of Glasgow. Voting online, you will be using the for or against buttons on the hub for your vote. In the hall, using your Bluetooth device, I'm rather hoping that button 1, yes, button 1 is for and button 2 is against. The vote is open. There might be a need, if you're on the hub, to scroll down to find the voting buttons. 5 seconds. Yes, I'll extend the vote. Is that making sense, Neil? The vote is closed.
They're voting for the overture, 147. Those voting against, 197. Thank you. The overture falls. We move now to the overture of... No, we don't. Oh, new section 6. Oh, I was hoping to get out the chair. 16. Yeah. Where is it? Oh, yeah. Section in the name of Alan Kimmett. Thank you, Alan.
Thank you, Moderator. Alan Kimmett, 272. I believe the Principal Clerk wants to read what's on the screen.
Just means the clock's not running for you, Alan. So this is a new section 16 in the name of Alan Kimmett, and it reads as follows. Instruct the Faith Action Programme Leadership Team in consultation with the Legal Questions Committee to review the Presbytery Mission Plan Act 8, 2021, and to report to the General Assembly of 2025 with proposed revisions, particularly in relation to team ministry and the adjustment process, and meantime note the willingness of the Principal Clerk's Office to assist presbyteries with flexible solutions, in particular to issues arising with team ministry. Thank you, Moderator.
Thank you, Mr. Kimmett.
Thank you, Moderator. Hoping to get back to the KISS principle. Last year at the General Assembly, there was quite a lot of discussion about team ministry because as people tried to implement team ministry, it became clear that there were a lot of gaps in our legislation in that area. The Legal Questions Committee took an instruction to address this and bring something back this year. For good reasons, they were unable to do that. Fortunately, the Principal Clerk's Office has been very helpful in providing guidance to fill the gaps. This is purely and simply a motion to ask that the gaps get filled and something's brought to the next General Assembly.
Thank you. We have two folks willing to speak. Innes Duncan.
Innes Duncan, 30. I note from section 10.7.2 that the committee hopes to be in contact with charges developing team ministry, only hopes. And as we heard on Saturday, the Legal Questions Committee has been so swamped with queries that they've decided not to do anything about it this year. By the time any changes are made in the regulations, we will have our team ministry up and running, but constrained by red tape. I would like to support this new proposed section as it asks that something be done with some urgency so that others will not find the situation as labyrinthine and difficult to negotiate through as we are finding. Despite all the churches in our proposed union agreeing to the plan of a team ministry, because this is new, the church's traditions and regulations have made and are continuing to make it more difficult to achieve our aims than is logical or necessary. To give but one example, I won't bore the Assembly, I'm sure there are others who are better at doing that than I am. Well, the Assembly can decide that. Team members will have no say or comment on choosing the colleagues they'll be working with. This seems to us to have lots of possibilities for a mismatch and isn't consistent with team working in other situations. Of course, the congregations have a right of call, but if we want to have our ministry team with not just different gifts, but getting on together and meshing well, surely something needs to change there. If I were to start talking about Christians having to sacrifice their lives, you would know that I wasn't talking about anyone here in Scotland. We are only being called on to sacrifice our traditions, our acts of assembly, or our acts declaratory. Surely, as has already been referred to in the Assembly, we must always be reforming. But despite its difficulties, I'm not downhearted. Moderator, I'm not much of a gardener. I never remember the right time to do things. It's always either too early or too late, which is actually quite a good excuse for not doing anything at all. A couple of years ago, I planted an Artemisia. It grew well, producing lots of branches with feathery green leaves. And at the end of the year, it was all brown and straggly. I read up what to do, and the RHS website said to prune it mid-spring. So last year I did just that, and it flourished again, and then died away again in the autumn. Now, this spring for us in West Lothian was very wet, and I didn't really venture out into the garden at all. We were due to go on holiday in middle of April for 2 weeks, and I thought, when we get back from our holiday, then I'll go out. That'll still be mid-April in West Lothian. Unfortunately, I got a man cold on the return from holiday, so it wasn't until well into the second week of May that I had a good look at the garden. And there the Artemisia was, producing a few straggly leaves at the end of the old branches, but no new growth. What should I do? Should I let it struggle on, or should I prune it? I grasped the nettle, as it were, and pruned it. Should I have pruned it? Was I too late? The RHS gave no guidance for idiots. Well, I went to have a look at it just last week, and lo and behold, there were no new shoots. Had I done it at the right time and the right place? Will there be new growth? I'm living in the hope that there will be. I think we can take courage from the fact that we are called to be obedient and not successful. We may not see the new growth by next spring. We ourselves may not live to see the new growth at all, but we are called to proclaim the good news, to sow the seed, and to be obedient, not successful. Moderator, I would support this new section, and I would make the plea, as Churchill said, give us the tools, and we will finish the job. Thank you.
I have one other name, Sharon Hollis.
Moderator Sharon Hollis, 493. As I've said before, I come from the Uniting Church in Australia. We've had the kind of provision you're talking about for team ministry for 46 years. When I was ordained 30 years ago, the common advice from my more senior colleagues was, don't touch team ministry with a barge pole. It's a screaming disaster. You'll end up hating everybody and everything. We have grown through that, and I would say now that most ministers leaving college now look for team ministry, to be in team ministry. They enjoy the support, the challenge and the opportunity to grow. I myself have been in a team and I was a better minister for it. So I really, just from a sibling church, want to offer you encouragement to keep growing. I've had many interesting conversations with people over the course of these few days about team ministry and about whether it can work or not. And I just want to say it can work. I would just also want to offer you one thing that we found very helpful. When we form teams, we require, in our church, every minister is required to have personal supervision. We also require those teams to have supervision, a space where there's an independent third party that can help the team negotiate the difficulties. It's human nature is we'll have difficulties with each other from time to time, but to help people negotiate that in ways that are productive before it becomes a conflict too big to resolve. So just a word of encouragement and a wee piece of advice.
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you. The convener of legal questions hasn't managed to pop up on the screen, but she's managed to pop up beside a microphone. So,
365, Marjorie McLean as convener of legal questions. As I indicated on Saturday, everything in this motion is already happening. I would slightly resist the idea that the Legal Questions Committee decided to do nothing this year. That would be to ignore a lot of work in creating answers to frequently asked questions by the staff. What we were unable to do this year was only bring legislative amendments. I would say that the one innovation perhaps in this motion is a very welcome one, and it's the encouragement that FAPLT and Legal Questions bring their policy side and our legal side together. Tommy and I had a lovely conversation last night and agreed that that would be very easy to do. And so if that convener is happy to accept this motion, this convener certainly is, and that might expedite us. Thank you.
Mr. Kimmett, do you want to make a response, and then I'll ask the convener.
Only to apologise if there was any suggestion that Legal Questions hadn't been active. I know they have.
Thank you, Alan.
Moderator McNeil 454, my thanks to Alan for advance notice of this, and also a conversation I had with him. And just as my colleague Marjorie McLean has indicated, at almost every FAPLT meeting we end up talking about team ministry. There's the awareness that team ministry is becoming more and more of our reality, especially as we come to the implementation of the mission planning group stage. And as a result of that, then we're keen to put together a focus group that would then work with Legal Questions and will do exactly as Mr. Kimmett has instructed us to do for next year. So we're happy to accept the instruction.
Thank you. Is the Assembly happy to accept? And online? And online. Thank you. Having just got in the chair, I'm now going to vacate it, I think, to let Sally come up, because I'm a moderator of the Presbytery of Lothian and Border, so I have an interest somewhere.
Hello, and just to say that I'm offering a kiss hat trick, because it works for Sally as well. Right. So we're actually at section 16, and we're going to begin with an amendment in the name of Alan Kimmett. Alan, if you'd like to, and yes,
Thank you,
Clerk will read the
Thank
amendment.
you, Moderator. This is an amendment to section 16 as in the print. It's in the name of Alan Kimmett, and he wishes to add at the end of section 16, I've just read that, haven't I? Oh, yeah. And further amend the Act by deleting paragraph 7, 10, little e, big E.
And Alan.
Thank you, Moderator. Alan Kimmett, 272. despite the good efforts of the clerk's office, there's one aspect of team ministry which is causing quite a lot of difficulty and is causing delays in congregations being able to call to team ministry charges. Rightly, the Presbytery Mission Act says quite significant things about the role of moderator and the importance of having a moderator defined, and that's entirely appropriate. I'm looking forward to a team ministry. As of the 1st of July, I will be part of a team ministry. I'm excited by the possibilities that brings. Moderator, I was going to say that I'm middle-aged, white and male. Because I use my bus pass to get here, I'm probably old, white and male. But as an old white male minister, I never have people treating me as some sort of second-class citizen, of ignoring me, sidelining me, things like that, because I fit a traditional stereotype. I talk to a lot of people who are less old, less white, and less male, and they often find themselves being sidelined or ignored or treated as second-class ministers. When I'm asked about our team ministry, people will sometimes say, who is going to be the moderator? It doesn't bother me that I'm not going to be the moderator. But I do know that in other situations, there are people who are bothered by not being the moderator because they fear that they will be treated as second-class ministers within the team. Folk asked me, can the moderator not just rotate on an annual basis so that one person's the moderator one year and somebody else is the moderator for the next year? That seems incredibly sensible. Unfortunately, the Act is defined in such a way that even if there's a vacancy in the charge which is designated as moderator, none of the other ministers in the team can step into that role. I have heard arguments that it's important you don't flip the moderator around too quickly because how do you avoid disputes and things like that? All bases of team ministries have to have a dispute resolution mechanism, and in the Act it says it's up to the presbytery to define who is the moderator. The problem is that there's a perception, rightly or wrongly, that that moderator is set in stone for eternity. By deleting this small section, and I think it might be possible to get the text that I'm hoping to delete on the screen, or it might not. I can read it, but by deleting this small section, I think it would give flexibility, give clarity, and give the Principal Clerk's office a little bit more scope to encourage creative team ministries. Would it help if I read the text that I'm hoping to delete?
Yes.
Section E of the relevant, I think it's 10(7)EE, says, for the avoidance of doubt, the ministers who are not inducted to the team ministry charge, providing the moderator of the Kirk session, will not automatically succeed to that team ministry charge on the occurrence of a vacancy, but would be entitled to apply for that team ministry charge through the vacancy processes set out in Act 8, 2003. I'm sure it was well-intentioned, but the effect of this clause is that people are investing the moderator in perpetuity role, and that's causing quite a lot of grief. So I would quite like to suggest, well, in fact, I move that this is deleted, and that will free things up a wee bit.
Okay. Thank you, Alan. I've Marjorie McLean on my screen. Marjorie?
365 McLean as Legal Questions Convener. If you were listening to Alan's reading of the section, you will hear that what it actually said was not quite what his problem is. What it actually says, and it starts for the avoidance of doubt, which is always a clue that it's saying something that would be true anyway, is that if you're a member of a team ministry and your chum leaves, there is no presumption that you are entitled to move to their job. And of course there isn't. You would have to apply for it. It's a different job. That's what that section is saying. Because it starts for the avoidance of doubt, and therefore it's true whether those words are there or not, I don't give a fig whether we get rid of that section. But getting rid of that section, I don't think solves Alan's problem, and it's a problem with which I completely agree. I think the problem is in the previous section, where it says that the presbytery shall appoint one of the ministers in the charge, or at least one of the jobs in the charge, to be the location of the moderatorship of the Kirk session. That's his problem. I agree with him. Let's not start footering about with other bits of legislation at 5:10, but just trust us that this is one of the things that we're going to look at. Personally, if I was God, I would say turn shall into may, and then you cover the two things I talked about on Saturday, the more old-fashioned kind of team where there is an obvious location for the moderatorship, and the flatter kind of team we have in Orkney coming up where it's more kind of in parallel. So, yep, get rid of that bit if you like. I don't think it makes any difference, but we will go on and deal with what I think is the real mischief. So I'm actually going further than the mover does.
Thank you. I don't have anyone else. I have a Jeff Barry as a point of order. Jeff. Or is it a... Sorry, it's a comment.
Sorry, moderator, it was a comment. It wasn't a point of order. I don't know enough about proceedings to make a point of order. Jeff Berry, number 53. I had to think about that. Can I just say the easiest way to have very, very smooth team ministries is whack in a robust rank structure. Cause some of the major... But, yes, that's a flippant comment. We work in team ministries in the military all the time because we have to. Very often somebody is posted away on operations or exercise, everybody else has to cover. We have a brigade senior chaplain, we will have divisional senior chaplains. So very often you can actually be promoted beyond somebody who may have been your senior chaplain within the military. It does work. Can I just say, with mutual respect, with an understanding, and we don't even use rank within the chaplaincy, we'll call each other by the first name, because the first thing we have is an understanding that first and foremost we are ministers of the gospel. So could I just encourage people to grab team ministry? It's a wonderful, wonderful form of ministry, and you can cover each other's problems and weaknesses. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Alan, is there anything else you'd like to say before I hand over to the convener?
Only to say that with the greatest respect, I don't think military hierarchy fits well within the church. Yeah, no,
it's just a comment.
That's okay.
Thank you. Convener.
Moderator McNeil 454, I'm a little bit confused because my suggestion would be, in light of my colleague Marjorie McLean's comments, to resist what Alan has brought, but if we can, if there's the mechanism, to invite or encourage or instruct legal questions to do some work on what Marjorie brought. Okay?
It's there.
We already have that instruction, sorry.
We do. So I just assure the Assembly that's what the Convener of Legal Questions has just said. The previous motion that we agreed in Alan Kimmett's name says it again too. So there's a work stream with legal questions. We're looking at all of this. The convener's reassured the Assembly, and we've also got an instruction here as well.
Right. Alan, in the light of all of that, and no is a perfectly acceptable answer, are you happy to drop your amendment?
My problem is purely and simply that the way things are currently, people are getting confused, and we have one charge within Fife where there's 3 vacancies in a team ministry, and they've advertised the role of the moderator first and will not advertise the other 2 until those have been filled. It's delaying things. This might not be the right motion. I didn't want to come with a wholesale reform of the Act. It wasn't appropriate. This is just something to be doing something now.
Okay. Convener, would you like to respond again, since I went back to Alan? Otherwise, we can move to we can ask the Assembly. We need electronic vote, okay.
Moderator McNeil 454, if I could invite Angus Matheson to speak, please, that would certainly help me out. Thank you.
Certainly.
Moderator Matheson 14, wanted to keep it brief.
it's for the Assembly to decide. We have already committed to look at these issues in Mr Kimmett's previous amendment. I'll leave it to the Assembly.
Thank you. We're going to move then to an electronic vote on the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Moderator. Sheila Kirk, 532. We are having an electronic vote for or against this amendment. As before, if you are voting on the hub, you use the buttons for or against. And again, if they don't appear at the top, you might need to scroll to find them. If you are in the hall, button 1 is to vote for the amendment. Button 2 is to vote against the amendment. The vote is now open. The vote is now closed.
It is 81 for, 223 against, so the amendment falls. And now we move to 16 in the, there you go, you may have it back. Yes, of course you may. Now we move to 16 in the print. So 16 as in the print. Wonderful. Well done. And online? And online. Super. Waiting on it. And we are now calling for the overture from the Presbytery of Lothian and the Borders. And right before we do that, I think everybody just needs to take a breath. Just take a breath. I can feel a little tiny bit of tension. If you want to have a stand up and a wiggle, feel free to do that too. Goodness sake. It's been a wee bit nuts. Thank you. You're very welcome.
No, I need your vote.
All right. And before too many people decide they're going to use this wiggle as an escape, I call the Assembly back to order. Who am I calling on? It's Norman. Okay. Thank you. All right, we're going to call to order so we can get started on this overture. And I call on Norman Smith to present the overture. And thank you, Assembly.
Moderator Smith, number 69. I am clerk to the Presbytery of Lothian and Borders, and I am accompanied by Mrs. Abigail Morrison, number 79. And you've already heard Abigail. Abigail is our planning convener. This is going to be short. Moderator, after working with the mission plan legislation for a year, the Presbytery, we bring this over to you out of concern that the Mission Plan Act is taking us in a very different direction to that of the denomination over the last few decades. In 2001, the Church Without Walls report, it was lauded as being the way forward. And it has this written in it when talking about the relationship between the local, the regional, and the national. It says this: local church is the focus of action, the place of initiative, questions, and vision. Our vision is of local churches discovering their vision of what God is doing and joining in. Regional church is the focus of support, the place of oversight, encouragement, and appropriate accountability. The role of presbytery needs to be radically revisited. Central church is the focus of essential servicing and national role, the place of ensuring equity and fostering links with national and international institutions. The role of the centre needs to be revamped in the light of the new role of presbyteries. That was written in 2001. Many years later, in 2019, the General Assembly adopted a radical action plan that said pretty much the same thing. They said it's about the local church. The radical action plan then gave birth to the Faith Action Plan in 2020, from which came the instruction to write a new Presbytery Mission Plan Act. There have been a lot of plans, and all of them have emphasized that the national supports the local. In 2022, we moved away from plans, but we created something called the D10 group. And the D10 group gave us FAPLT. And FAPLT states, the church is still reaching for what she might become, but the flourishing of the mission of the local church is central. Concerning the national functions of the church, the emphasis is less on committees doing work and more about how the national organization delivers for the local church. That has been the direction of travel of our denomination for years and decades, until we come to the implementation of the Mission Plan Act. In section 232, it says that every year, final approval must be received from both FAPLT and the General Trustees. If Presbytery and the committees in 121 do not agree, then it goes to review. And this is what it says. It says, it's in section 224. It says, if final approval is not in place within a period of 3 calendar months after FAPLT's and the General Trustees' receipt of the mission plan, the matter shall be referred to the Mission Plan Review Panel by the Presbytery, and the panel shall assist the parties to resolve the matter so that final approval of the mission plan can be given. It doesn't say what happens if no agreement can be reached. And the implication is that you start to go on a merry-go-round of meetings until someone gives in. But remember, final approval lies with the committees. Every year, final approval lies with the central church committees. I'll say it again, you need their approval or you cannot move forward. And the Act, as it is written, is a massive centralization of power and goes completely against the direction of travel of our denomination. Consider what it means. Presbytery is now a regional body made up of usually between 100 and 200 congregations. If everyone turned up to a presbytery meeting, I know it's a big if, but as a clerk, I do live in hope, all right? If everyone turned up to a presbytery meeting, we're talking about 300 to 400 people or more. If those 300 to 400 people cannot get agreement from a national committee of at most 30 to 40 who are not local and who do not know the situation as well as the locals, the will of the local and the regional is overridden. Final approval must be received from the committees of 121. And this overture seeks to redress that imbalance. Every 5 years, final approval will lie with the committees because national oversight is a good thing. In the intervening 4 years, plan reviews are submitted and committees do get to comment, but final approval lies with presbytery. We believe what we are proposing is in the spirit of Church Without Walls and the direction of travel that our denomination has been on. The convener of the Assembly Trustees just a couple of days ago even reinforced this in their opening speech. Now, please note, it does not stop an annual review. Presbytery will still do an annual review. We actually believe that that is a good thing, and because the Presbytery mission plan should be owned by Presbytery every year. All it does is change final approval from every year to every 5 years, with presbytery approval still needed every year. Sorry, final committee approval in 121. The counter motion says review every 2 years, but still with committee's approval. We believe the counter motion does not address what this overture is seeking to address. Moderator, we created the new presbyteries with the intention that they would step up and be the driving force of renewal in our church. This act, as it is written, undoes what they were intended to be. And we believe they will never be what they should be as long as this level of centralized power is written into our planning legislation. Lothian and Borders Presbytery are asking the General Assembly to reaffirm the direction of travel that we have been on for decades and to trust the presbyteries to do the job that we have been created to do. Moderator, as a commissioner, I move the deliverance and I ask the Assembly to approve.
Thank you. We're going to move to questions. So everybody understands, we're going to move to questions and then receive the overture, and then we're going to move to the counter motion. So questions for Lothian and Borders. I don't see anything on my, I see anything online? No. I see a neutral comments, but we aren't going to go to comments. So only questions. Are there any questions? Fraser Edwards. Is it a comment? Oh, it's a comment. So you'll have to wait. We're only taking questions. Sorry. So let's move to section 1 and receive the overture. Okay. And now I'm going to call on. Oh, sorry, and online. Thank you. Thanks for keeping me straight. So we're moving to section 2, and there's a counter motion for section 2, so we're moving to the counter motion. Thank you.
Moderator McNeil, 454. I'd like to ask Dr. Campbell to bring the counter motion. Thank you.
Karen Campbell, the convener of PIMPIG. The counter motion is in response to the overture, and the overture, we believe, effectively seeks to dismantle presbytery mission planning and return us to the former scheme, which has proved ineffective for years and served this church poorly. The presbytery wants you to throw away the tools which the General Assembly of 21 put in your hands, tools which have been tempered and honed over 3 years by a church working with common purpose to make hard and often unpopular decisions, but decisions that are decades overdue, decisions we're making together so that the Church of Scotland will survive and, most importantly, thrive as part of the mission of Christ in Scotland. So whatever the presbytery tells you, they're not about lightening the administrative load. The presbytery still proposes to do annual evaluation and developments locally. It's about the one presbytery asking the whole church to give up on itself, a casualty in an obscure and pointless contest for unaccountable control between a presbytery and the rest of the church. We all know presbytery planning is challenging. The change it requires us to make should have been undertaken by previous generations. We are the inheritors of 2 churches which came together with double numbers of buildings and little attempt to address those challenges over the last 100 years. The overture presented will make no change to the decision-making which we can no longer escape and will severely damage the partnership we've embarked upon between the local, regional and national church, and which is finally helping us to reach sustainability, however painful that is. It was in recognition of the failure of the previous system of planning that this General Assembly decided to initiate a closer working partnership between all 3 courts, Kirk Session, Presbytery and General Assembly, believing that with the guidance of the Holy Spirit working together, however challenging, we could meet it. The General Assembly of 21 set up the presbytery mission planning so that decisions would be made by presbyteries according to nationally agreed criteria, primarily the 5 marks of mission. And presbyteries are expected to listen to and to work well with congregations, but ultimately have responsibility. If a presbytery does what it's supposed to do and makes decisions based on these criteria, then approval is granted. Hardly an outrageous imposition on our Presbyterian polity. After all, each presbytery has been allocated a share of the available ministries, and the general trustees continue to have responsibility for all the buildings. GA21 agreed that there should be accountability, and that's a key plank of the GA of 21 Act. But that's what Lothian and Borders wants to discard, accountability. The Overture seeks to have no engagement for 5 years until sign-off, with changes able to be made with no reference to the GA in the intervening period, which is strange, given that it is subsidised by the rest of the church to the tune of £1.6 million, and is allocated ministries more than its population justifies because of the weighting system. In essence, Lothian and Borders wants to leave liability for all its buildings with the national church, but not allow the wider church any say in how to use its resources, how it uses these resources. Currently, the Presbytery of Lothian and Borders has only 20 charges which are self-sustaining, and that means the rest of the church contribute that 1.6 million for ministries. That is entirely the correct thing to do, but to shut out the national bodies that this General Assembly has charged with responsibility for managing those very resources is neither fair nor good governance. The Overture not only introduces a lack of accountability, but worse still, it entirely mistakes the presbytery for being the local expression of church. It's not. It's the regional body. We're all responsible to each other. We're all accountable to each other. The challenge facing the church will only be met by all of us together in partnership, holding each other accountable. Over the last year, whatever the challenges, the national bodies charged by this Assembly have in the main enjoyed good relationships, seeking to be supportive and a questioning friend. This Overture breaks this culture of support and accountability. As well as a source of accountability, the GA Committee and the General Trustees have been, more importantly, a source of advice and knowledge on a vast scale. The future of this church depends on everybody working together. The Special Commission on the Effectiveness of the Presbyterian form of government, which reported in 21, said, "It goes without saying that a good relationship between the presbyteries and the central church will also be crucial. That's the key to the future good functioning of the church going forward. If a presbytery changes its plan with resource implications beyond itself, how then can it shut out the committees entrusted with the work by the General Assembly? Have you consulted?" It's a question Pimpig asks every presbytery, and the answer is not always yes. What might happen if the presbytery becomes a supreme body without the facility for it to be held accountable? We're only 3 years into the current planning system. Those presbyteries which have accepted the authority and wisdom of GA21 have been well led and got the big picture, the mission of Christ, and have achieved remarkable things. We're getting the right people and the right buildings in place. Hard decisions have been made. It's not been easy, but we are well on the way to achieving what was envisaged and which the other consequent General Assemblies have affirmed until we get to our new normal. The National Church has been a partner in this. Last month in Perth, presbyteries met with the GTs and Pimpig, and we explored the implications of moving to an evaluation and development every 2 years rather than an annual one. The consensus being that such a change would not imperil the presbytery planning process, but would give presbyteries the time and the space to fulfil their role. FAPLT, to whom Pimpig answers, and the GTs are responsive to the needs of presbyteries, and we place this proposal before the GA. This recognises the lived realities across the church. We're all tired. We all need to be kind to each other. The planners and implementers asked in June last year for the first AED to be taken gently and slowly, and that's what we're all doing. This has meant in reality that while some presbyteries have completed an AED, others are getting there and will be nearly at the second anniversary before this is undertaken. It's an important process and can lead to requests for review, and so we must not think that this is a tick box exercise. It must be done carefully, as when plans were first approved. Hard decisions have been made. It's not been easy, but we're well on our way to achieving what was envisaged so we can get to our new normal. And the National Church has been a partner in all of this. Last month in Perth, presbyteries met with the GTs and we explored, I may have said that. In closing, this is not about centralisation, but accountability, to ensure that the presbytery makes the decisions which rightly sits with it and does not impose on the local, but listens and engages. The local are the congregations, not the presbytery, as sometimes is mixed up in the overture. Whatever decision is made, it will not change or lessen the challenging nature of mission planning and the losses we're all feeling as we seek to implement and plan for growth and the sharing of the gospel. Let's approve this well-proven notion of accountability and support, which has always been the strength of the church as we move forward in hope. I invite the convener of FAPLT to move the counter motion, and I believe Mr. Rennie, the vice convener of the General Trustees, is going to second it.
Neil 454, I so move.
And we have a second.
Seconded.
Thank you. We have a point of order from Ennis Duncan. Ennis? There you go.
I'd be grateful if the Central Church could communicate with the local church without using abbreviations. I lost the count of the number in that last report, and I'm not sure I knew half of them were. Thank you.
Thank you. Duly noted. Thank you very much. We're moving now to questions, and I have a question from Monica Redman. Monica? Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Moderator. Monica Redman. 4:21, which is roughly when I thought we might have done this. So my question is in part to Karen. Sorry, I can't remember your title, love. But also to Lothian Presbytery. And I speak as a newbie planner. In fact, actually, technically an acting planner, because I said I would act as if I knew what I was doing until Claire Eleni found somebody that really did. And I do appreciate it is good to be held to account. I am also 20 years in ministry, so I am one of those who failed to take seriously the opportunity given by Church Without Walls 20 years ago. I have also hugely benefited from I was going to say open door, but it's too far to use an open door, so the constant email responses and phone calls and so on from Pimpig, from the Law Department, from the General Trustees, they have just been fantastic. I can't praise them enough for all the support they've given, and I do appreciate the more gentle approach towards the AEDs. But, and only those seated behind me can see this is a large but. My question is, is when will we be trusted? Now, I don't mean me particularly. Most of you don't know me to trust me. Those of you that do know that I'm a flake and an airhead and can't really be trusted to do anything except dream dreams and have nice ideas. But the rest of you are all really good stuff. I've known some of you, or I've watched some of you every year for 20 years, and you are good stuff. And if you're the ones at presbyteries doing this, I trust you to do this. I trust, even though I know just where Glasgow was talking about, because that's where I first lived, 13 years in Cranhill. So I do know a little bit about that, but I trust you to know it much better than I do now. And you're the local presbytery, so you know what's needed. I was in Lothian before it was Lothian and Borders. I trust you. I trust you to know what to do. When will we be trusted to go that next step? I love having a backstop. And you guys sitting at the table are the best backstop ever. But I also want to get on. And I love that you would smile with approval at what we're doing, but I would love it even more if, as you smiled with approval, because we've talked about it, and we have done the consult, you just say, great. This idea that I would be seeking approval or seeking permission constantly before I do the next thing is really... Oh, I don't get distressed. I'm too old and ugly for that. But it's unnerving to not be trusted to have learned and be seeking to do things as presbytery. Because actually presbytery is part of the local. Presbytery planning is not mission. Mission is what our folk do face to face, eye to eye. What I want to do is lift the structures so that they are so light, so transportable, so easing that mission can really take place. And I know that's what you guys want too. So can we just get away from this idea of constantly asking for permission or even looking like we need to ask? Can we start trusting each other to be getting on with this? And yes, review it.
Thank you.
Sorry, I was going to turn to Lothian and Borders. I do think that you are misrepresenting what Lothian and Borders are trying to do. I think there is a genuine spirit behind their overture, and I ask that you honour that genuine spirit. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much. I don't see any more questions, but we have comments. So Fraser Edwards, and then Gary Peacock. And I'm going to remind you of the keep it short for Sally, because we are pushing the time, and what everybody has to say is critically important, but let's make sure that it's succinct. Fraser and then Gary.
Edwards, number 64. Thank you, Moderator. The Presbytery Mission Plan Act begins with these words: in requiring presbyteries to plan mission within their bounds, the Church of Scotland seeks to, and there's various bullet points. Final point, engage the Faith Nurture Forum and the General Trustees in assisting presbytery in their planning. Assisting doesn't seem to suggest supervising, checking, enforcing or approving. It seems the spirit of the Act. The 2019 Radical Action Plan said that through reducing the number of presbyteries, these enlarged bodies would become the natural place to which resources, funding and decision-making are devolved. It would free up time and energy for local mission by reducing the administrative and legislative burden, and they would have the capacity to take risks and learn from mistakes. Are we actually doing those things? Are we actually ready to trust our presbyteries to loosen our grip? For me, it becomes a bit of a Ronseal argument. Presbytery mission planning should do what it says on the tin. It's about presbyteries, trusting presbyteries to do the work that needs done, and it's about mission. I know that a lot of the restructuring work has been painful but necessary. But how many hours from nearly every person in this building in the last year has been spent on planning and building issues and not on reaching out with the good news of the gospel? In the last year, has your presbytery spent more time discussing mission or more time discussing planning? Presbytery mission planning should be about presbyteries getting involved in mission, but a hamster wheel of annual reviews becomes burdensome. And I suspect even in this counter motion of going to reviews every 2 years, that the committee are conceding something of that and not asking for such constant reviews. We have incredible news to share about the life to be found in Jesus Christ. But if we prioritise control, we prioritise supervision and administration, we stifle that life. I've heard a number of times at this assembly already, various central committees resist any new work and say that they need time to get on with the work that they already have. The same is true for our presbyteries. As a parish minister from the Lothian and Borders Presbytery, I do support the overture, and I hope that presbytery mission planning one day might be allowed to prioritise the mission part. Thank you.
Thank you. And we have Gary Peacock and then Rory MacLeod.
Moderator, Gary Peacock, 104. I rise to support this overture, and I'd like to preface my remarks by saying I realise what a difficult subject this is. I shall try to speak with love and grace, as we all should, yet at the same time we're constrained to tell the truth. There's an incongruity between what we heard from the convener of the Assembly Trustees the other day and the Presbytery mission planning process. We heard of the national church being there to serve and facilitate the local church, and also to enable, of course, the church's prophetic voice to be heard in a national and global level. Yet in presbytery mission planning, as this overture states, control has been centralised. For example, I was involved in the early stages, and we've had the General Trustees telling the presbytery representatives, if you don't close this building, we won't approve the mission plan, and those buildings must go into B star or the plan won't be approved. Not all conversations were like that. We had good conversations with Pimpig, are willing to listen and negotiate. I don't want to portray it all in that way, but of course, power really lay with the central church. No one can doubt, having listened to the convener of the Assembly Trustees the other day, the seriousness of the church's financial position. We have to address it. We can't bury our heads in the sand. I'm a minister of 3 former rural parishes, west and northwest of Dumfries. We are part of the 71% rather than the 29%, and there's no way that the parish I'm in should have a full-time minister, and people accept that. However, we're to go into a linkage with a large parish in Dumfries. We're willing and happy to do that, and then we will be part of a viable unit, part of the 29%, hopefully raising enough money both to provide ministry in our own parish, but also to give more to those in priority areas to support ministry, as we heard Christopher Rose speak about the other day. What concerns me most about presbytery mission planning is the loss of local agency. My congregation feel powerless, utterly powerless to affect change. The system is a closed one. If we were subject to civil law, we would at least be able to appeal to natural justice. Yet we cannot do that. A review is only a review of the process followed, not the decision. That breaks my heart on behalf of the people in my congregation, and it seems to go against the whole thrust of the way in which the church can function. We can all understand decisions made for financial necessity and to be careful about resources, but not those still made by when we've reached a position of financial stability, but we're still being asked to close buildings. Why, if we're in a viable unit, part of the 29%, should we have to close 2 of our 3 buildings? And we're willing to close 1, we're not Luddites, but surely if we are viable, that should be left to us, not micromanaged from the centre. I welcome this overture as a way of giving greater flexibility to presbyteries to allow viable units to make their own decisions. We're entrusted with mission. Perhaps there should be a bit more accountability about that, but we're entrusted with mission. So why are we not being entrusted with resources while the committee at the centre keeps a watching brief? In contrast to what the convener of PIMPIG said, I don't believe this is a matter of divide and rule, and I don't believe it's a matter of coaching horses through the whole process. Rather, it's about trying to redress that balance where power here is at the centre. I welcome the overture in that regard. It's not shutting out national bodies. They will still have a right to be consulted, and they will have that ability every 5 years to make their views known. We're not, I think, in supporting this overture, doing anything to undermine the financial viability of the Church, but rather allowing a degree of flexibility to our new charges as they go forward, as they contribute positively to the work of the Church. Thank you, Moderator.
Thank you. We have Rory MacLeod and then David Ferguson.
MacLeod, Céad Hun Seach, MacLeod 417. I'd like to endorse, I should declare that I'm a member of FAPLT. I'm also a Presbytery clerk. And I'd like to endorse what our planning convener, our mission planning convener, has stated about our appreciation of the extraordinary dedication, hard work of PIMPIG, frequently going the extra mile. At the same time, I'd also like to endorse her appeal for trust, and I'd like to counter the impression that might have been given that Lothian and Borders were somehow trying to throw the clock back and act in a maverick way in despite of their fellow presbyteries. I can't speak while I shall let other presbyteries speak for themselves, but certainly my impression is of a strong sense of collegiality between all of our new presbyteries. And what we're trying to do, and what I believe this overture from Lothian and Borders is seeking to do, is to simply balance or rebalance the responsibility in favour of presbyteries in response to the appeal from the Assembly trustees that we should take this decisive step towards becoming the kind of church that we aspire to become. So I'd like to encourage the Assembly to resist the counter-motion and to support Lothian and Borders overture.
Thank you. And David Ferguson.
Ferguson, number 4. I find Mr. Smith's analysis to be persuasive. The direction of travel since Church Without Walls and in the 2019 Commission and in the convener of the trustees report yesterday are all towards a greater devolution of power and resource towards the local and regional levels. This is the reason, or one of the reasons, why we have created a smaller number of presbyteries but with much greater resource so that this greater degree of autonomy would be possible. Having said that, I doubt that there is a great deal between the two motions that we are faced with. It's whether we are biennial or quinquennial. The quinquennial seems to me okay in the terms in which Mr. Peacock has further outlined it, and I'm inclined to support that and to trust our presbyteries to get on with the job that the General Assembly has charged them with. Thank you.
Thank you. I have no more names in front of me, so... Okay, sorry, the computer said no, but go ahead. Sorry about that.
It's 60 Andrew Dawn from Lothian and Borders Presbytery. I am the convener of Stewardship and Finance. I would just like to
Sorry, could you speak up a bit?
Sorry, can you hear that? Andrew Dawn, number 60. I am from Lothian and Borders Presbytery. I am the convener of Stewardship and Finance. I would just like to comment that my understanding of our Giving to Grow figures is that while we only have 20 congregations who fully meet that charge, the surplus that they give covers the ministry elsewhere.
Folk are struggling to hear you. Maybe if you get very close
Sorry.
to the mic, that's better.
Right, okay, I apologise. I've said my name, number, hope you've got that. I am from Lothian and Borders Presbytery. I am the convener of Stewardship and Finance, and my understanding of our Giving to Grow figures for this year is that while only 20 churches or thereabouts are meeting the ministry costs in full, they are also meeting the ministry elsewhere costs in sufficient numbers to pay for the full ministry costs of Lothian and Borders Presbytery. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, before I assume, is there anybody who has been waiting to speak that we haven't seen? Okay, then the next step is I'm going to invite Lothian and Borders to respond, and then the convener to close, and then we will go to an electronic vote.
Abigail Morrison, number 79. I just wanted to respond to some of the comments that were made earlier, particularly in proposing the counter motion. This overture of ours is not about dismantling the Planning Act or dismantling the plan or going back to the way the world was before. It is very much about keeping the plan in place, but simply removing the amount of central and direct oversight or the frequency of that. It is not just for Lothian and Borders Presbytery, it's about all presbyteries and making planning, we believe, work better for all of us. There were comments about the local and that presbyteries not local. That is true to a degree. However, these are presbytery plans, they're not congregational plans. Presbytery has the responsibility to build and deliver those plans. There was a hint, more than a hint, that our overture was about somehow ignoring the strictures that we have been given in terms of financing and in terms of ministry numbers, and that's not the case. We still accept that there should be central direction in terms of the numbers of ministries posts that presbyteries are allowed. That still will happen in the plan. And that the General Trustees, every 5 years, will be making comments and approving what we say we need to do with our buildings. We're not removing that central control. We're not trying to avoid it. This is not about trying to undo the plans. This is not about trying to avoid our responsibilities. It's about giving that responsibility to presbytery and letting us, as others have said, get on with it over the 5 years. Our overture includes that we still have to consult with FAPLT and the General Trustees every year, so there's no exclusion. And we have found them very helpful when we've discussed specific issues. This is not us and them. This is about trying to make the plan more responsive and more, to give in fact accountability and responsibility to presbyteries. And that's really what I would want to see. We still believe that every 5 years, every year for presbytery, because that local control is important, and every 5 years for approval by FAPLT and the General Trustees seems better than every 2 years. So we would still support the motion.
Thank you very much. I call on the convener.
Hello, everyone. Moderator McNeil 454, I invite Dr. Campbell to respond.
Thank you.
Karen Campbell, convener of PIMPIG. Fraser's right. The Act does give the power to presbyteries to work with the local and the national. Presbyteries are trusted to do what it says on the tin of the Presbytery Mission Plan Act. And the vast majority of plans that went through PIMPIG and the General Trustees went without comment or challenge. The role of the national is support and collegiality. In such cases where presbyteries haven't consulted and they don't do what it says on the tin, we are there to ask the difficult questions, but the decisions lie with the presbytery. The presbyteries are not under the control of the national church, But it does, the consequences of this overture will remove the right of review by the congregations. The issue is, as soon as a plan is approved by a presbytery, if the overture is successful, once it's approved, the presbytery can do anything it wants for the next 5 years. It could even change every building from B to A, or from A to B. And there is no accountability locally or nationally. The overture does go back to what didn't work. And I would urge the General Assembly, we are nearly there. Let's get to our new normal and affirm the counter motion, which is in response to what the presbyteries, planning conveners and business conveners and clerks discussed at our meeting on the 1st of May. And let's go to 2 years for the annual evaluation and developments. Biennial, sorry, not biannual, it's biennial, every 2 years.
Thank you. And there is a point of order. Brian Kerr.
Moderator Kerr 227. It was just something I heard that I would appreciate the clerk's guidance on. The convener said that if the plan does not come to Pimpeg, then the congregation loses a right to review. My understanding was any decision that would be taken by presbytery, a congregation ought to be cited for their interest, and then they would have a right to have some sort of appeal heard, whatever act or whatever process we have. I'm just wondering if the clerk can comment on that.
Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Kerr. I can confirm that there remains the right of a Kirk session or presbyters to request a mission plan review after the presbyteries made their annual decision. So it is in the draft legislation.
Okay. Thank you. We are going to move now to a vote, to an electronic vote. And I will hand over. I know you've been waiting on round 2. Thank you.
This is the first time that we will have had a motion and counter motion vote. And in order to do a counter motion vote, the hub has to go into counter motion method. You will be seeing different buttons appearing. There will be buttons that either say for the motion or for the counter motion. Now, while that is happening, it is always a danger things might seem to disappear, but you just need to refresh your current live debate page. If you are using your Bluetooth device in the hall, if you favour the motion, which is the overture from the presbytery, you press button 1. If you favour the counter motion, you press button 2. The vote is now open.
It's on the procedure. I'm confused.
Okay.
Murdoch 148. After we voted for the motion or the counter motion, whichever is left, do we have a vote on that, whether it goes forward, or is this the vote?
Yes, you do. Yes.
This is the vote. Thank you.
No. We'll have the vote.
And then we vote on whatever's left standing.
Yes or no.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Right, are we able to restart the vote? Yeah. The vote is now open. Ten seconds. The vote is now closed.
For the motion, 196. For the counter motion, 119. The motion goes through. And now we need to vote on whether we want to accept the motion. Again. And it'll be another electronic vote.
Now, this time we are voting for or against. So the for or against buttons on the hub, you might need to scroll a bit to find them. Oh, they should be available. So if you are voting for on your Bluetooth device, it's button 1, and against, it's button 2. The vote is now open. Five seconds. The vote is now closed.
For 210, against 95, the overture passes. Thank you. I'll take them all, yeah. Okay. Okay. Who? Martin. Yeah.
Okay.
We turn to a new section in the name of Mark McEwen. Thank you, Mark.
Moderator McEwen, 173. Is the clerk going to read the new section?
Do you want to read it? Yes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're all getting a bit slow. Right, so this is the new section 17. Invite the Faith Action Programme leadership team to record the number of bases of adjustment being processed by presbyteries in terms of the various forms of adjustment referred to in section 7 of the Presbytery Mission Plan Act, Act 8, 2021, the time taken to process these and whether or not these bases were consistent with the relevant presbytery mission plans, and report to the General Assembly of 2025.
Thank you. And thank you, begin with thanks and say thank you to the convener and for all who serve within the work of FAPLT, as staff or in programme groups, particularly on PIMPIG, because the work that you carry is wide-ranging, it is difficult, it is a huge amount of work, so thank you to the service that you give to the Lord and to the Church. The aim of this new motion is to help the Church see the progress of the implementation of mission plans. I see this largely as an administrative task with FAPLT through PIMPIG, simply recording and reporting the work that is being done without any analysis of the numbers of adjustments but simply letting us know the progress of adjustments by each presbytery in a given year. As a church, we continue with the implementation of the Presbytery mission plans, and we've got a massive task ahead of us. The Assembly trustees reported that we currently have 925 charges. Our mission plans aim for 660 ministries. Now, I don't have the stats in terms of the numbers of adjustments, but to make that maths work, there must be a huge volume of adjustments ahead of us. And I don't have to tell the Assembly that adjustments are a difficult road to travel. Congregations and presbyteries are putting in hours of hard work, and at various points they experience delays, traffic jams and bottlenecks. And these traffic jams are frustrating. Any traffic jam's frustrating. They deflate, and deflated congregations can lead to deflated giving, more intermittent attendance, people stepping back from service. They can cause a congregation and largely our church to slip into decline. And I'm sure none of us want this. We want to encourage, we want to build up congregations in the church. And I believe that's the reasoning behind the amended paragraph 1.2, which we'll approve in section 16. I wonder, though, can we do more? Can we go further? Can we take a look at the current or potential bottlenecks and see how we can navigate those better? And I am concerned about this volume of workload that is going to be coming to Pinpeg. With the volume of adjustments anticipated, asking FAPOLT to check every basis of adjustment could create a bottleneck. Requiring them to do so goes beyond even the remit of their own Pinpeg, as given in Appendix 9 of the report. Pinpeg are simply required to advise. Advice is something that you seek when you need it. As we progress implementation, there will be many similar adjustments throughout presbyteries. The road will be well travelled, and as such will need less and less need for advice. Yet the Act asks for basis to be sent to them to check consistency with the mission plan. Is there a better way? Is it possible that in the future we could simply say to presbyteries, get on and do what we said you could do? You have an approved plan. Now you implement it. We don't need to double check your homework. Just do what we said you would do. Such a vision is in line, as we've been hearing, with the devolution spoken of by the Assembly trustees. Now, I would have liked to have moved that we change the Act now, but I'm not sure if we have enough evidence for that. We've all got our own experience, but not a good sense of the big picture. So this new motion is asking for that big picture to be gathered. It is asking for transparency so that the Assembly can be kept informed of the progress of presbytery mission plans. I so move the motion, and have arranged a seconder.
Is it seconded? Seconded. Thank you. A point of order from himself on the balcony. Romeo. Alex, sorry.
Himself, number 279. Up with the youth delegates, just for the bants. I wonder, just to ask the clerks, I'm kind of confused by this afternoon, a natural state after 4 o'clock, but is any of what we're now looking at relevant following what we've just done with respect to the overture of Lothian and Borders? I'm just asking.
Thank you, Romeo. And I can say that because Alex, my minister. Anyway, so yes, it is, because this is purely, as Mr. McKeon has just said, he was going to propose an amending the Act, which would have had other implications, but he hasn't. He's simply asking for the data. So the Act is all operating as normal, and this is purely about asking for the process and just making sure everything's consistent and so forth. So it is all in.
That being so, I shall go and see what light from yonder window breaks.
Oh, wow.
Thank you. We have a comment from Marjorie McLean. Or perhaps not. Then we don't have a comment from Marjorie McLean. Thank you. There are no other questions or comments on the board. Any questions from anyone here? No, can I ask the convener?
Moderator McNeill, 454, we're happy to accept the proposal.
Thank you. Is the Assembly happy to accept the proposal? And online, thank you. We know. Yep, 17 as in the print. We ought to go back to number 10, but I think this is power. Time is such that I think we need to get out of here and let the big sing in. As we go, please remember those who've presented reports, not just today, but throughout this week so far, and who will present reports. They do so with passion, with a concern and a love for their Lord, but also for the church. Please spare a wee prayer for them at the end of each day and at the beginning of each day. Will you do that for me? Now go in peace. Amen.